afternoon. My name is Naheda, and I will be the CSPC volunteer for this year, interviewing Dr. Dugan O'Neill, the Simon Fraser University's VP Research and International.
So just a little bit of statistics about Simon Fraser University. It is a leading research university with a global impact. It has always consistently, not always, but consistently been ranked #1 Canadian top Canadian university by Maclean University ranking. It has 8 facilities, over 31,000 undergraduate, 5,730 graduate students, and 180,000 alumni. So I haven't done justice to Dr. O'Neill's biography, but we'll have a short conversation with a few questions, and hopefully that will provide a little bit more perspective of what Simon Fraser University is doing in terms of science and policy and how it's impacting research. So our first question, Dr. O'Neill, would be, what are some of the major challenges or areas of focus in science and policy research at Simon Fraser?
Thanks. Yeah. So SFU researchers are involved in a number of what we call global challenges, and at SFU we use the UN Sustainable Development Goals as a framework to engage in those challenges. But if you ask me what's the #1 cross-cutting challenge that I see our researchers engaged in both the science part and the policy part, it's around climate change or sustainability. So those in particular, Sustainable Development Goals 11 and 13 on sustainable cities and communities and on climate change in general. And those, that work spans all 8 faculties at SFU. We have folks from our business school or from arts and social science working directly alongside engineers and chemists and others who are more engaged in technological solutions. And so the policy part of it is partially, how should we change policy in Canada, or how should policy change around the world as the climate changes and we have to mitigate climate change or adapt to climate change. But part of it is also about interacting with community and understanding what those communities need and how we can adapt the things that we're doing inside the university to adjust to that need. And then if we do come up with a solution inside the university, how to make that solution fit or make it palatable to the community that would then have to adopt it. And so there's all sorts of complex issues of policy embedded in a change in society and a change in the economy that comes through climate change. And so if you ask me about the one global challenge that is really cutting across all of our faculties and has everybody very engaged right now, it would be around climate.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Maybe we'll move on to the next question. You talk about some of the challenges like climate and this is making communities sustainable and some of the sustainable development goals. What are some of the key areas that you can progress these challenges?
So I think we have a couple of different areas that I could use as examples. One of them is clean technologies more generally. At SFU, I'll use the example of green hydrogen specifically. So that's something we've been working on for decades at SFU, since at least the early 90s. And it started in sort of fundamental chemistry, not necessarily intending to be applied to green hydrogen. But it's progressed from fundamental chemistry. It's now also in our engineering school. We've spun out companies that work in the area that are involved in the production of green hydrogen or the use of green hydrogen. And then we have policy researchers who are looking at the economics of hydrogen production and use and the incorporation of hydrogen production and use in the energy systems in cities or in remote communities. And so SFU has been involved in that area right from the fundamental, very academic focused publishing of papers on the way materials work, right through to being a customer of our own companies and purchasing the capacity to generate our own hydrogen using the products that they create. And then through that, demonstrating how that hydrogen can be used, and then working with community to see if they can also adopt some of those technologies. So that's a very a technology, an example that starts with technology development, or starts actually with fundamental research and ends in technology development. There are other examples also, very partnership driven, like that one, around food security. So as the climate changes, of course, food security ends up being threatened in Canada, but also threatened around the world. And so we have food security researchers in the Resource and Environmental Management School at SFU that are looking at food waste and food education, nutrition education around the world. We also have folks that are approaching it from a more technological angle, looking at agri-tech. And we work with more than 100 different companies in British Columbia to try to bring novel products to market that serve local farmers to reduce their use of fertilizer, reduce their use of water, improve the amount of crop they can get from an acre of land, or in an urban setting that they can get out of a greenhouse. So this is at the same time trying to address a problem that's being exacerbated by climate change, but also trying to support the economic desires or requirements of the communities that they're in, so that they can produce their own food and they can actually profit from producing their own food. And so between the resource environmental management side of things, which is more of a social approach, and then a technological approach with the engineering side of the institution, and then the partnership between institutions and between our institution and industry helps drive those things. So if you ask me about the sort of a common thread for all of the work we do in this area, it's around partnership.
Yeah, absolutely. Very important. You talk about some of the keys to progress in the areas of challenges that you've discussed. Are there examples? I think you sort of provided some examples, but are there other examples at FSU of your approach in action? And then what sort of impacts have you been seeing in society?
Sure. So yes, I did give an example of around hydrogen, another one around agri-tech or food security. I would say that those approaches, as I mentioned at the end of my previous answer, are rooted in partnership. And so maybe I'll talk a little bit about how we partner with community in order to take the things that we do inside the university and make them relevant and impactful for the folks that we work with. As an example, I just, at this conference, I didn't fly here from Vancouver. I flew here from Tanzania. And in Tanzania, we're working on food security with probably 6 different Tanzanian universities, trying on both the social and health side and on the technology side. So we're working on land there, on test plots owned by one of the institutions that is one of our very important partners. Working with other universities in Tanzania that are among our very important partners, and adapting and adopting the kinds of practices used in agriculture in British Columbia to a very different climate, to communities with very different needs, in a very different sort of financial or social system than what we have in Canada. And so when we translate what we do inside the university to British Columbia, there's a process that we go through with engaging with farmers, engaging with local agri-tech companies, engaging with communities around their needs, and then thinking about how that's changing in the light of floods and forest fires and all the other sorts of things that apply in British Columbia. And then if we take that same approach in Tanzania, then some of the elements are common and some of the elements are very, very different. And so from an academic perspective, it's a very interesting difference in problem. From the community perspective, hopefully both sets of communities, a small British Columbia community and a village in Tanzania, each benefit from the work that we're doing. And so it's always about translating that work from inside the institution into something that benefits people. But it's also about making the research better, because only when you're informed by those communities to really understand what the problem is and how the problem is different from community to community, can you really make the research relevant. And it makes stronger academic publications, and it makes a bigger impact on the world.
Absolutely, it's very refreshing to see the sort of translational, taking something that's relevant to Canada, but also trying to apply it elsewhere and benefiting society, not just globally, but also nationally, internationally, kind of. So it's very refreshing to see that there is that sort of collaboration and knowledge sharing that is happening with SFU. Sorry, my apologies.
No problem.
The next question is more around the current context of science and policy and the constantly evolving narrative that we have, and how does SFU stay up to date with policy issues, and how do you pivot and adapt your programs and research to navigate what society needs in the current realm and in the future realm?
Well, partly we come to the Canadian Science Policy Conference and learn from all our colleagues what's happening at their institutions, and from the federal government, what's happening in the federal government. But the other part that I think is really key, that's definitely more than sort of the once a year interaction here, is the constant contact with community. And that community, those communities are constantly giving us feedback and having us alter, pivot, change what we do, or change how we do it. And when we talk about interacting with community at SFU, community is a pretty broad term. So sometimes it's a community in the sense of a municipality. We're working with the city of Port Moody on their community plan. Sometimes it's a group of not-for-profits, for example, that are working in a similar space. Sometimes it's say the community of small and medium-sized enterprises that are working on food security in British Columbia. They're a group of farmers, or they're a group of companies working on environmentally friendly fertilizers or something like that. And so it's the feedback, taking in community knowledge at the beginning, and then continually allowing that knowledge to shape the program of what you're doing, both on the research side, but also on the education and training side of the institution. So I would say that's our greatest source of information that keeps what we do relevant to the world, is that community feedback loop.
So you talked about how the benefit of attending CSPC is one that gives you an opportunity to network and share knowledge with others, not just in academia but also in other sectors. How does the role of CSPC in general, what role does it play in capacity building, and do you have any comments about the importance of CSPC in general with respect to science and policy in Canada and perhaps beyond?
I think CSPC provides us really with the only forum we have that brings all of the relevant players together. So CSPC performs a vital convening role. There are some places where, so I'm at a university, there's some places where universities get together and discuss things, but it's relatively rare to bring together the full set of universities from across the country. It tends to be, clustered regionally across the country. So to bring together even just all the universities is already a service, but to bring the universities together with representatives from the provinces and the federal government is really rare, because there are real important issues that we all share, but it's rare that we get all of our perspectives together in the way that CSPC brings us together. And I don't know of any other forum in Canada that does that. So I try to come to this conference every year, and I try to also follow the other CSPC initiatives throughout the year.
Excellent. Yeah, that does bring us to the end of our interview. I think Simon Fraser University has it's a small but mighty university, and I think there's a lot of initiatives and research that's going on at Simon Fraser that other academic institutions can probably learn from, and just the idea of engaging community and being able to use a bottom-up approach is really refreshing to hear, and it's one that does more impact and more positive impact than enforcing our own knowledge on communities. So it's great. Thank you for the opportunity to interview you, and thank you for attending CSPC 2023.
Well, thanks for the discussion.